to very briefly just touch on one more aspect of this judging, perceiving thing that I think will be helpful for you to understand, and then we will move quickly into an impossible topic for me to cover, and it's hilarious, and I'm already laughing at myself for trying it, so we'll see. One of the things I wanted to say about the judger, perceiver in relationship. Now that relationship can be anything, counselor-client, it can be parent, child, spouse, whatever. The judger is always going to come across as more intense in that relationship, and then the perceiver is always going to perceive that action as then way too intense. So I'll give you an example of that actually sparked a significant change in my behavior. So I have this boy, he's amazing. My wife and I were never going to have kids. The kids were not they were not in the plan. We both worked, we both loved to work, and I was always a youth pastor. I always said, well, I've got 100 kids. I don't need a kid. Like, if I had a kid, what am I going to do? But then, the Lord had other plans. So we've been married for 30 years. I've got a 14-year-old, if that gives you any indication of where we're at with that. All of my friends my age are like, bro, what are you doing? And I was like, I can't. They're like, hey, come on, come hang out. We're going to, watch this game. I'm like, I got to help with homework. They're like, what? Like, their kid's like 27. So yeah. But I went into my son's room, and this was about a year and a half ago, something like that. And I gave him a very simple, as I understood it, a very simple, very easy command. And I knocked on the door. I'm big on that, but that's me. I knocked on the door, and I popped my head in, and I said, hey, buddy, when you get a chance, I need you to empty the cat litter. Okay? Now, that's not a new chore for him. That's on his list. That is a standard weekly thing. And his response to me was, and I quote, you ready? You ready for this? This is good. Stop yelling at me. You know that there can be a disconnect between how you sent something out and how somebody took something in, right? Now, the easiest thing for me to have done in that moment is to become defensive and I'm not yelling at you. You want to see yelling? I'll show you yelling. Now we're yelling, right? And to my shame, there have been times in my life when I was much more unaware that I'm sure I have done that with him. But he said, stop yelling at me. And in that moment, all of this stuff came back to my mind, and I physically took a step back, and I said, oh, hey, buddy, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it like that, man. And I said, look, now, of course, as an INFJ, introverts don't do well in the moment. All right. So if all of a sudden, then now I'm stuck. Now I don't know what to do. And I was like, oh no, it's fine. Just don't worry. Yeah, just don't worry about it. Because all I'm thinking is, okay, don't make this worse, And so I just literally backed out, closed the door, and I thought, okay, we'll figure that out later. I don't know. And then but about 10 minutes later, I heard walking down the hall, and he was going to change the cat litter, And so my lesson there is, I mentioned this, but I don't think I was as clear about it. So the message I got was that I need to be intentionally lower in intensity with him. And I'm doing this with my wife now too, and this is blessing relationships, okay? Because there's a if you're all of my 11 INFJs in the room, there's a thing called the INFJ ghosting, where you probably have all experienced this on some level, where you have a good friend and you're just hanging out and everything's fine, and all of a sudden, they are gone. They are not responding to your text. They don't respond to your text. They will not respond to it is the relationship. I don't even know what happened. Well, what happened is you got way too intense for them and they cut it off. And so when I'm interacting with my son now, I intentionally engage with him using methods where I can buffer my intensity. And so what my go-to thing is texting. Because texting, it's like, okay, look, I can at least frame a text in a way that doesn't sound like I'm psychotic, okay, right? So that can be with clients, that can be with family or whatever, but that one thing has probably been the biggest blessing to me in terms of my personal relationships. And then the only other thing I wanted to mention was just that, the idea of going back to the idea of introversion and extroversion, like, those concepts, the two end letters are so crucial for a person. And I think that they are probably the easiest pieces of the code to really help a person understand themselves, because people really get introversion, extroversion. And when they get that, it can free them from a lot of guilt and a lot of shame. I mentioned to you, I grew up in a Southern Baptist church, and I eventually worked as a youth minister in a Southern Baptist church. I don't know if you know anything about the Southern Baptist, but I can assure you, in the mid '90s, there was no play. We're not joking around here. We're going to reach people for Jesus, whether they want to be reached for Jesus or not. And so there was a thing. I don't even know if they still do it or not. I go to a Presbyterian church now. I'm not Presbyterian anyway. It's just close to my house. I've decided I've decided that there's not a perfect church out there, and I've decided that if there was a perfect church, I would certainly ruin it. If I went. So what we decided to do was, let's find a church that prioritizes the Word of God, and we'll just do that. Okay, we'll just do that. Like half the stuff I go, oh, really? Are we doing this? But it's fine. But in the Baptist church, every week we went soul winning. All right, and the way that worked was every Tuesday night. The really super spiritual members of the church met, and we got cards from the people who had visited the previous Sunday, and now we're going to go out and just knock on their door. And I said, in the Baptist church, you don't call people like pastor, you call them brother, right? Anyway. So my Pastor Mike said, Brother Mike, it's not 1940. We can't go knock on somebody's door. You're gonna get shot. What are we doing? And he's like, I'll tell you what we're doing. We're winning souls, and you're gonna go knock on them doors. And I was like, hey man. So here was my plan. And now I didn't know anything about introversion and extroversion at the time, but I devised a plan with the church secretary. So because we're Tuesday nights when we go out. So Monday morning, I would get the secretary to go ahead and give me my assignment cards, and I would call ahead and try to schedule an appointment. Right? Say, I thought like a normal person in my mind, like a normal person. And so, here was the other rule. The rule was, if you went to their house and they were not home, AKA they didn't come to the door, then you were to take your group and go to, Food World or go to some public place, and you're supposed to tell some people about Jesus. And I have to tell you, that was, so am I proud of what I'm about to tell you? No, I'm not. I'm not proud of that. But I would take my little group, and then if we knocked on a door and they didn't come, I'd be like, "Hey guys, we're not going to Food World. I'm not doing that." And then we would just hang out and talk, and then come back to the church at the end. Because you got to come back at the end and report. You had to report back. And it's like, all right, how's this group doing? He said, well, they weren't there, and then because we couldn't find anybody that would talk to us, and it was, we'll get them next week, we'll get them next week, Pastor. And but I always felt like a horrible person for that. But then now it's like, okay, at least now I know. When I the first time I learned about introversion, extroversion, I went, Tuesday night at the job, I get it. Oh, wait a minute, I'm not a weirdo. I'm an introvert, you know? So it's just incredibly freeing for me. So I wanted to just share those two little things there about introversion, extroversion, and judging and perceiving, and highlight how I think the first and last letter, the outer letters, are really, really helpful in that regard. Now, having said that, let's go to the next slide. The next slide, next one, okay. Now, having said that, the last two, the first letter and the last letter, I want to be careful how I say this. All of human behavior is primarily directed by the middle two letters. Okay, so these are what is known in the field as the cognitive functions. The cognitive functions. And so this is, again, remember, this is how people, and if you think about this, if you in a scientific sort of way, you can see like this really represents almost everything that people do. Take in information, process information, make decisions on that information. You know, even when you're just meeting people and hanging out and having coffee, still there's this process that's happening. So so we're going to talk about the cognitive functions for a second. And if you know anything about the cognitive functions, you realize that I have 48 minutes to teach you 6 hours worth of information. So I want to say this at the very beginning. I made an intentional decision to cover this in session 3, my last session, because I wanted to at least introduce you to the idea. And then at the end of this little session, I'm going to give you a couple of places where you can go find some more information about it. This would be a year or two worth of learning, you know, right? As you're just as a lay person, as if you just sort of, you know, sitting around Googling. So if what I'm about to say to you feels like we've just turned on the fire hydrant and now you're trying to drink out of that fire hydrant or whatever, if it feels like that way, just take a deep breath and just give yourself permission to know that you don't have to know it all. All right, so this is really just to like introduce the concept. Okay, so the cognitive functions. All right, so next slide. Now, what you need to know about the cognitive functions is that there are actually, in fact, 8 cognitive functions. There are 4 letters that fit into the middle 2 spots, but actually there are 8 possible combinations because every one of those sensing, intuition, thinking, feeling, every one of those functions has 2 expressions. One is extroverted, one is introverted. Now, again, this will be, thankfully, the final time I say this. I don't like that wording because we've already talked about extroversion, introversion, and now this just confuses everybody. So here's how I would like for you to think about it. There is an external and an internal manifestation of each of these 4 cognitive functions. So somebody who has sensing, they have either an external manifestation of that sensing function or an internal manifestation of that sensing function. So, you with me? Sort of? Okay. Good. Yeah, I like it. All right, next slide. I think I explained. Yeah. I think I explained. All right, next slide. Sure. Sure, why not? I'm going to stop for a second. No, I'm not. Yes, I am. Do I have your permission if we're to go back and forth in the slides? Are we good if we do that? Okay. So I want to we're going to do this like in 10 seconds each, and then we'll come back to it. Okay, do it. So there is, for example, if we talk about intuition, there are 2 manifestations of it. Now, so the way, and I'm giving you these very specific codes in the way it's written, because that's the way you're going to find it when you go to do your own research online. So with intuition, because you remember they've already used this term introversion, extroversion. So instead, for intuition, they mark it as the letter N instead of I, so it's an N. And then there will always be the little label right after the letter, and it will always be a lowercase e or I. And that means external or internal. All right, so for intuition, you've got extroverted intuition or introverted intuition. So now, when you're looking up information on your own, you're going to use the phrase extroverted intuition or introverted intuition. But I think it's easier to understand if you just think of it as external intuition or internal intuition. And that'll be the same case for each of those four codes. So with intuition, intuition can be expressed in people outwardly or inwardly. And I'll give you how the subtle differences there. Extroverted intuition, are you ready? Think of extroverted intuition as a tree that's branching outward. So that somebody with extroverted intuition is presented with a problem or a situation or a whatever. Where do you want to go eat tonight? And their natural, from birth, inclination is to then, now we're going to explore all of the possibilities. Right? Okay? You with me? Did that, my wife, can you tell? My wife has extroverted intuition. You go, all right. Okay. So the extroverted intuition persons, particularly when it's, anyway, I'm trying to be careful with my language because we haven't gotten to this other topic yet. Particularly when it's in their dominant function. They are all about brainstorming possibilities and new things, but it's always with an eye for more and expansion. It's always outward. So if you have introverted intuition, and by the way, I will tell you how to find which one you are, in a minute. If you have introverted intuition, then think of it, instead of a tree going outward, think of it like a funnel going down to a point. So for introverted intuition is about this idea of finding a solution or themes. So I'm taking all of the detailed information, but I'm distilling it down to a point. So people that love to teach often have introverted intuition because they spend their lives with ideas, but they're trying to come to the point of it. They're trying to find a point to whatever they're intuiting. Okay, so next slide. So great, so great. Sensing is the same way as intuition. It can have an external expression. It can have an internal expression. So SE, what we call extroverted sensing, is, so my son has extroverted sensing as his dominant function. So extroverted sensing is about paying attention to the physical world around you with all five senses in the present moment, here and now. And so the way that looks is they are like, they're very in the moment, and they can adjust in the moment at an elite level. So most of the professional elite athletes have extroverted sensing as their dominant function. They can be on a football field and there's 22 people on this field and they have the ball and they can look into what looks like utter chaos and they can find, you ever heard this thing? Oh, that guy can really find that hole. That's it. But he almost certainly has extroverted sensing. So the classic extroverted sensors are like fighter pilots, professional athletes. My son loves Taekwondo, right? Because you get to hit people. and so when you're sparring, you can't, there's no structure to it. The person is doing whatever that person is doing. And so then your job then is to read, respond, react to it. It loves that kind of stuff. So that's more extroverted sensing. Introverted sensing is really more about almost like the past. So an introverted sensor takes all of the experiences they've had from their past, and now they are filtering their current present world based on that information. And so they are highly organized. They prefer the status quo. They kind of have the experiences in their life that have been good and have been bad, and they are working to conform this outer world to this inner idea they have of what is a good experience. So I have one of my best friends is a medical doctor who has introverted sensing, and he is elite at archiving and creating systems and organizations. If you are an ESTJ, then introverted sensing is your second function, and ESTJs. If you're an ESTJ in the room, just if you're not already the boss of your place, then you just start to work towards that, because you do that. That's your superpower. All right, next slide. So remember when we talk about thinking and feeling, the idea was really about making decisions. You remember that? So, and again, this can be extroverted or introverted. So somebody who has, so if you're an ESTJ, by the way, extroverted thinking is your dominant function. So if you have extroverted thinking, what that means is you're making logical decisions based on, and you have this keen ability to boss people around, essentially. All right. So you are extroverting that decision into the space around you, and you are naturally telling people what to do. Which is why ESTJs are the natural born leaders, because they have dominant function, extroverted thinking, they have second function, introverted sensing, and it's a ridiculous superpower. It's actually should be illegal. Like, it's just like, what? Like, that's not, how's that fair? Like, why do you get all those? You know, my friend that's an ESTJ runs his life in such a way. I've never seen anything like it. They don't ever have any problems in their family. Everything is just, it is a well-oiled machine. He graduated from medical school, and somebody wanted him to join their practice. And he's like, oh, no, no, I'm starting my own practice. I'm going to make the system. Y'all are all going to work for me one day. You know? And so he's done it long enough now. You know what he told me a few months back? He's like, yeah, 4 or 5 years from now, I'm not even going to practice. I'm just going to run everything. He's like, I've got it all set up. I'm like, man, I don't even know. I can't even do half of it. So introverted thinking, though, here's what we talked about with the like some of these might be your clients. People who have introverted thinking are people who they're making those logical decisions, but they're doing so based on sort of an internal frame of reference. Their logic is a very private logic. Now, the problem with private logic is this: it is highly resistant to outside information. And so my son and my wife both have introverted sensing as their second function. I never get into an extended argument with either one of them. I will not debate, because it's not going to help. That's not going to change their mind. It's not going to change their mind. So I have to find a new way. Like, I have to connect. Okay, 3 weeks ago you did this same thing, and you got this bad result, and that's your best shot, because you're saying, like, the internal consistency. You've already done this experience, and now you know what you've gotten. So, ergo, maybe don't do that again. That kind of idea. All right, so next slide. It's my favorite slide. So, in the same way, those decisions that are the feelers, these can be manifested in an external way or an internal way, and this is really important. And so, like, if you have extroverted feeling in one of your top 2 spots, the idea is you are making decisions based on the emotional impact of that decision on the people around you. So these are people that, like, they don't always, but they can have a hard time making hard decisions because they know that's going to, this is going to really hurt this person. I don't really want to do that. But it's always about being aware of the emotionality of the other person. Now, here is a thing though. People that have extroverted feeling in one of their top 2 spots, by nature, are aware of the emotionality of the people in the room. And that can feel overwhelming because it's almost like reading minds. Like you can be in a room with 12 people and you know that 2 of them are not in, right? And so if you've ever sat in a meeting and like where there's been some sort of awkwardness, like the person with extroverted feeling has sensed that awkwardness from the very moment it started. They know exactly what's going on and they'd rather leave the room. Thank you very much. So it can be difficult to navigate extroverted feeling. Introverted feeling is you're still making a decision based on a subjective thing, but the subjective thing is not now what other people think. It is what is my internal value system. And now that sounds awesome until somebody's internal value system might be different than yours, right? Because listen, so I will tell you, if you know anybody in your life, and I keep looking at the time just to sort of make sure, if you know anybody in your life who you would classify as stubborn, anybody in your life that you would classify as stubborn, I will guarantee you that in their decision-making slot, they have introverted thinking or introverted feeling. One of whatever one they've got, it's introverted. Because they are making decisions based on whatever's happening internally. Now, these people can be quite valiant as well. You can see how somebody with introverted feeling would give themselves up as a martyr because, I will not bow. I'm not doing that because my internal value system says that is wrong. I will not do it. They are, so the positive sides of having especially introverted feeling is that they are, ironically enough, buffered against peer pressure. So whereas an extroverted feeler is highly susceptible to peer pressure, a person with introverted feeling, they're not going to do what the crowd wants them to do. They don't care. If they're doing what everybody else is doing, it's because that's a coincidence, okay? That's a coincidence. Everybody's going there and I like going there too, so fine. But they are quite happy with doing the exact opposite. So, all right, now, that's that. Let's go to the next slide. And, okay, sure, let's do this. It's fine. You ready? Okay, one more slide. Let me see. I just need to, okay, great, perfect. Please don't hate me. So, you have 2 letters in your code, right? You have 2 letters. Those 2 letters are your top 2 cognitive functions. Now, based on a formula that I'm not teaching you, one of those is the first one, and one of those is the second one. It's not necessarily in the order that they appear. So, S and N is not always the dominant function, and then T and F is not always the second function, all right? So you might have a type where your dominant function is extroverted thinking, and then your second function is introverted sensing, so my ESTJs again. So it's not necessarily in that order, but the 2 letters that you see represent your top 2 functions in some order. Those are your superpowers. All right, those are the things that you do without even being aware of it. Someone who has extroverted feeling in a workplace, they are the glue person, they are the chemistry person, they work to make everybody in the room on the same page. And they can tell who's out of joint, and they will work until that person is not out of joint anymore, right? Everybody's aligned. these two functions become your superpower. So what you have to do is you have to learn how to leverage those two functions for optimum efficiency in your life. That's the trick. So what you want to do is this. You want to type into Google or whatever your browser of choice is. Type in your 4-letter code. Now don't put the -A or the -T. That's gonna get things confused. Just put in your 4-letter code, and then you're gonna type in the phrase cognitive functions. All right? So INTP, cognitive functions. And then it will list for you what your 4 cognitive functions are. Wait a minute, there's only 2 letters. So the way this works is this. You actually have 4 cognitive functions, not 2. Well, technically speaking, you actually have 8 cognitive functions, but, well, we're not going to get into that. You have 4 cognitive functions that you can be aware of and tap into. Okay. And it goes like this. The third and fourth functions are the mirror opposites. So your first function, your second function, then your third function is the mirror opposite of your second function. So if your second function is introverted sensing, then your third function is extroverted intuition. So then if your dominant function is extroverted thinking, then your fourth function is introverted feeling. I know that's a lot. Don't worry about it. Just, you can Google your 4-letter code and then cognitive functions, and it will literally just tell you, here are your 4 functions. And then there you go. That's all you need to know. I train our graduate students on the formula for how to do this with their clients, because I want them to be able to do this with everybody. And that's a miserable thing, and you don't want to do that. All right, now there's one specific little lesson I want to give you here about your cognitive functions and how they work. Oh, and we were talking at the break. I did want to mention this too. We were talking at the break about this. We have entered into highly complicated waters. And I want to strongly encourage you to read broadly. Pay attention to multiple voices about it, because you're going to hear people and you're going to hear all different kinds of things. So believe me, if you take your first 4 websites where you're going to look up, you say, okay, extroverted thinking is my dominant function, and then you're going to type in extroverted thinking, and you take those first 4 links, you're going to get 4 nuanced, different descriptions. So we're all just building some of these ideas. So just be patient with yourself as you're doing it and listen to multiple people. In a moment, I'm going to encourage you to do some research on YouTube, which is the first time a college professor has ever said, I'd like for you to spend more time on YouTube, please. And one of those things is, the beauty of YouTube is that everybody can participate. But the curse of YouTube is that everybody can participate, And so, my boss was calling. I got distracted. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the 4 functions work like this. So your number 1 function, we call it your dominant function. That is the thing that you do. And then the second function is going to be called different things: parent function, navigator function. I prefer to think of it as a navigator function because I use it as a navigator function in my life, and I'll give you an example in just a minute. This is important. The third and fourth functions, you should view them as underdeveloped, and particularly when we're talking about the fourth function, possibly dysfunctional. So that, because here's the thing, some of you are going to have extroverted thinking as your fourth function, right? Well, some of you are going to have extroverted thinking. Others of you are going to have extroverted thinking as your first function. But you have to remember, the person who has extroverted thinking as their dominant function, they have used that function their literal whole lives, and it is awesome. The person who has extroverted thinking is their fourth function. They only use it when they're in stress, and it is often it's a highly dysfunctional version of extroverted thinking. And I'll give you a clear example in a minute. So your third and fourth functions, I want you to think of them as, well, here, the next slide. I want you to just think about this as a car, and we're going to have a driver and a person riding shotgun and two kids in the back. All right. So the person who's driving the car, think of that as that's your dominant function. And then the second function rides shotgun. Third and fourth functions are in the back. They're like the kids. You with me? So, next slide. A very interesting psychological phenomenon happens when people enter stress. And when people enter, and I don't mean like a little stress. If people enter into a little bit of stress, what tends to happen is they tend to overuse their dominant function, and people are like, hey, come on. Like, especially like if you introvert your dominant function, like, and you get a little stress, you just sort of just disappear into your head. And like people are like, hey, where are you? Like, you come, like Dr. Warburton telling me, why don't you go touch some grass? There's a real world outside of your house, Brad, and you haven't been outside in days. So go outside, breathe some air. But when you are under real stress, the following phenomenon happens. And you can picture it like this. The fourth function essentially kidnaps the dominant function and renders it unusable. And then the fourth function takes over. Now, next slide. As cute as that picture is, we all know that if you have this kid driving this car, very bad things are going to happen, right? So in this scenario, you can picture that this kid has somehow now kidnapped the dad, thrown him into the trunk, and now he's driving the car, all right? I'll give you an example to help you understand. I think this will help you understand. I'll use myself as an example because it's the only example I've got. I'm an INFJ. So for an INFJ, their dominant function, their number one function is introverted intuition. All right. So I think that's what I do. All right. I literally sit around and think and write on my little notepad. Second function is extroverted feeling. Now, because extroverted feeling is my second function, introverted thinking is my third function. Right? And because introverted intuition is my first function, extroverted sensing is my fourth function. I love the fact that we had Taco Mama today, because I'm going to tell you a story that happened at Taco Mama. And what's funny is, I didn't plan this, it also involves my friend who's the medical doctor, ESTJ. So, of course, because he's an ESTJ and he runs his life at a level that I tell him all the time, I'm like, man, I have so much respect for you, like, gosh. But because he runs his life so well, he has 3 kids, and he has them really involved in all of these fantastic, like, cool hobbies. And so somehow he convinced his 13-year-old boys, he has identical twin boys, somehow he's convinced these boys to get into CB radio. CB radio. And so these boys are like messing around and doing stuff, and they know Bill Bubba Bussy, Rick and Bubba. Bubba lives 4 houses down from this guy. And so Bubba's there, and they're putting up antennas in the thing, and the boys are like calling Guam, and so the boys are all really excited about it. So they're telling all the boys at school, so hey, here's a new thing. And so all the boys are like, hey, that sounds really cool. And so they said, well, there's a big, huge like CB Expo. And so my son says, well, they've invited me to this CB Expo. And I was like, yeah, man, that's awesome. Let's go. So here's what happened. Now, the introvert made a critical error. The critical error is this. Dr. Jonathan says, he has a very large car. He's like, well, I'll just drive. And I thought, that'll be fun. We can talk. Kids can play, hang out. Yeah, man. So I left my car behind. And so here was the thing. This was going to last from 9 to 11. It's a very quick expo. And then we'll go maybe grab a bite to eat. So in my mind, INFJ, in my mind, 9 o'clock. We're done at 11. We're going to go eat. 11:15 to 11:45. Go back home. 12:15, 12:30. I will be home, and I can recharge myself. Okay. So about noon, they decide that somebody has heard that something has gone on with one of the boys' sensors or something, and listen, there are like 100 70-year-old men in this room, and there are 4 13-year-old boys that might as well have been the Beatles. These old men descended on. It's like, are you lost? How did you get here? And so the boys are talking CB language, and these kids could have built these dudes out of every dime they had. So now somebody has heard that these boys have a thing. I don't even know what the thing was. The thing's not working, and so they're like, well, we're going to fix that thing. So now they're out in the parking lot, and they're like, do I have a computer? And I'm looking at my clock, and it's like 12:15, 12:30, and I'm going. So we get in the car, and I think certainly we'll just forego lunch and I'll be home. And so they said, hey, let's go get lunch. Okay. And so they said, well, where do you guys want to go to lunch? And I was thinking, surely we'll just go to fast food place, 5 minutes, out, done. Nope. Taco Mama in Oak Mountain on a Saturday. So we drive up to Taco Mama, and the line is out the door. So I thought, surely, everyone will see that and go, oh, well, let's go somewhere. Nope. Park that car. Guess we're eating at Taco Mama. And I stood in line, and I could feel it. And it shifted. And now I'm in a place where I should not be mentally. And I'm angry. I'm angry, but thankfully I'm an introvert enough that nobody has caught on to the fact that Dad is not okay, right? So we go into, and I had the weirdest experience inside of Taco Mama. So all of a sudden, I'm just hanging on, and I become aware of everything that's happening in my environment. My 4th function is extroverted sensing. And all of a sudden, I'm like, I know what the score of the game is. Alabama's playing basketball. And I hadn't watched an Alabama basketball game all year, but I know the exact score, and they're losing. And that stinks. Why are they losing? I don't wonder what's going on. I don't even know who's playing. There's a kid over here who is screaming, and he's clearly old enough that that kid is 6. Why are they screaming? Taco Mama has a green menu board, and they've written in red on it. I can't read that. And I'm sitting there, and I am aware of everything that happens. Now, listen, in that moment, I was able to do something radical. I knew all of this information. And I went, okay, wait a minute. What's my second function? Extroverted feeling. So I took a breath. I said, what is everybody around me feeling? And I looked, and my kid is laughing and smiling. These boys are all goofing around. Everybody's laughing. Everybody's having fun. People have brought their dog. Their dogs are inside, but no one cares. There's one person on the premises of Taco Mama who is in a bad mood, and it's me. But all of a sudden, as I reflected on what is important here, and what's important to me, my second function, this is why I call it the navigator function. When I leaned into that function and I went, everybody in my world that I care about is having a blast. And all of a sudden, and I'm talking about like that, it was gone. I was like, okay, it's fine. And then I was able to go through and eat lunch and do our things and get back in the car and go and eventually get home. Yeah, much later than I wanted to. But so that is an example of how if you can understand your cognitive functions and if you can understand how they operate, then you can begin to actually work within yourself. See, if somebody says to you, if you're stressed out and somebody says to you, well, just don't be stressed out. Just don't do that. Well, how am I supposed to do that, right? But all of a sudden now, if you begin to know your cognitive functions, then you have actionable information that you can use. So you can picture it like this. So remember, there was a dad and a mom and then the two kids. And so now the youngest kids kidnapped the dad, put him in the trunk. But remember, the mom is still sitting in the shotgun seat. So what's happening is the mom is leaning over and saying, hey, buddy, pull the car over. You're fine. Pull the car over. We're going to go get your dad. You're going to get back in the back seat. And everything's fine, right? And because she's mama, pulls over, right? So that's why I particularly call it like the navigator function. I think that knowing your second function is one of the most important things that you can know. Maybe knowing your second and your fourth function, because when all of a sudden, if you and notice it, like how are you acting? What are you thinking about when you're in real stress and kind of playing with that idea? I think all that's really important. Now, I also realize that you're not, so that's going to take some years of kind of going through that. So let me give you a couple of ideas about how you can expand your knowledge. So in the 70s, and then this edition came out in the 80s, if you want to read a very accessible book, don't go read Carl Jung. You don't do that. You don't want to. I mean, if you like the challenge, sure, right? 1920, psychological type. Carl Jung, go do it. Carl Jung was one of the smartest people that's ever lived. Carl Jung met Sigmund Freud when Carl was very young, and the two hit it off so well that they had this hours-long conversation. The very first time they met, they were almost breathless. And Freud had tagged Carl Jung was going to take over psychoanalysis. And but then Jung began to develop these ideas, and Freud was like, "Oh, yeah, no, you're not doing that." So they didn't play well together. But a psychologist named David Keirsey, Keirsey, David Keirsey, wrote a book called Please Understand Me, which is, as far as titles go, not great. Please Understand Me 2. Don't buy one, buy two, and second edition. And so I don't know, it's $20, $30. It's a fascinating read. It's very accessible. It's written to where you can understand it. You could go get, Myers-Briggs, Isabel Myers, Catherine Briggs, mother-daughter team, by the way. You can go buy their work. It is not quite as accessible, but if you want something you could read and sort of really understand, like if you want like an airport book, Please Understand Me Too. Psychologist David Keirsey takes the idea of the four temperaments and solidifies all of that and then explains all of the 16 types. It's amazing. So a huge book. But then I will also tell you, when you have information in especially like in counseling and psychology, try to find free information. Try to find free information and see what happens. It's not there. Because if people have good stuff, they are going to sell it to you, right? And so the interesting thing for me is that psychological type is one of the areas that's not true. You can get every bit of information you need. You can get for essentially free. So you want to use the power of your web browser or whatever web browser you're using. Just start to just Google around and start to find some things. And, you know, remember, we're always surfing the web with a, you know, spirit of discernment, you know, and all of that. But, you know, look around and if you find one thing you like, that's fine. But don't just rely on one person's feedback on that. Go to YouTube. There is likely a YouTube influencer for every single one of the types. And so you can do that. If you really want a good scholarly start to it, Alexis Kingsley on YouTube. Alexis Kingsley. I don't know her. She's not sponsoring me. But I have spent hours and hours and hours and hours. And she has really good, there are things on YouTube there about psychological type that are of different qualities and different depths. And so there are people on there who love to do skits, and how the 16 types perform in an airport. And they do a funny little skit. That's fun. Those are great. It's great. But it's not me. I'm not doing that. So just look around on YouTube and on that, and you can find tons of information about it. And so that would be kind of where I would start. You can do some certification stuff if you wanted, but it is not necessary. It really is not necessary. You can get almost everything you need from Kiersey's book. Do the internet, do the YouTube, do all that kind of stuff. If you really wanted to take it a little deeper, get Kiersey's book. For an investment of $20 or $30, you really could give yourself pretty much a master's level understanding of it. So yeah, that's what I've got. And how about that? We did it. My email address is on the next slide. If you have questions, there you are. Yeah. So I'm going to ask you to do something that most of you are probably not going to do, and that's fine. There's a book called